What kind of person scams $55,000 out of the people that they supposedly love? What kind of person can use family trauma and create lies about their children and wife in order to scam and manipulate $55,000 out of a small community of really closely bonded people? Well, today I'm going to show you who that person is and how exactly they scammed such a large amount of money. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Kaarson and how he robbed a community of $55,000 and how that amount is growing every single day. So in order to understand how Kaarson got to a position where he had enough leverage and power to steal $55,000 off people, you have to understand how he got there in the first place. I initially met Kaarson on a podcast all the way back in early 2019. At the time, he was streaming World of Warcraft to little to no success, getting 4 to 20 viewers. However, he did start to either get view-botted or engage in view-botting, where he saw his numbers skyrocket to about 60 or 70. I think he realized what was going on there and realized it wasn't sustainable, so he was quickly looking for a way to exit the World of Warcraft category. He saw no way for himself to grow in such an inflated and encumbered category where there was thousands of other streamers just like him. If you don't know much about Twitch or streaming, the best way to get started is to find a category that has a lot of viewers but not a lot of streamers, and that gives you a better chance of succeeding. Kaarson and I met on a podcast hosted by a guy called Striker. This was a podcast talking about all things to do with Twitch, Twitch meta, dramas on Twitch, new Twitch policies, stuff like that. Realistically, these were probably people that shouldn't be talking about it because all of us combined had a viewership of maybe 70 or 80. It was pretty low. We really didn't know what we were talking about. Kaarson and I went on there and we shared a lot of the exact same thoughts and mentalities when it came to Twitch, what was right and wrong, and how to grow on Twitch. From there, a friendship quickly blossomed and we got to know each other a bit better in personal DMs. We would stay up late talking crap about streamers who were doing some really weird and wrong things, and also talk about, the future and what we wanted to do if we ever got to a position where Twitch was able to be our full-time jobs. It was around that time that I discovered a game called Conquer, which fit the exact profile that we wanted as streamers. It had a lot of viewers, it was in the hundreds, but it had like 5 to 10 streamers at any given time. And upon my first stream in that category, I went from a viewership of 15 to 30, and I told Kaarson about that and told him to give it a shot. And he went from a viewership of like 15 to 40. And he was hooked. He became obsessed with Crunker and dedicated his entire channel to sticking to just Crunker content. And that was the beginning of what I would call the good days with Kaarson. Now that Kaarson and I were both working on Crunker content, we decided to work even closer than we had before. We were constantly raiding into each other, constantly in each other's chats, and constantly talking about new ways we could innovate content on Crunker. At the time, it was a pretty fresh game. It had really just come out, and we wanted to be at the forefront because we saw a big future in Crunker. So I had an idea. We're going to start some tournaments and run tournaments weekly together with prizes for in-game currency and even IRL money. Kaarson loved this idea, I think mainly because it meant he didn't have to do any work. I organized, I got the players together, I ran it on my stream most of the time, I put up the money or the in-game currency. I kind of did it all, and Kaarson found a way to, let's say, leech off that. Now, at the time, I didn't really view it as leeching because I just saw it as two friends helping each other out and figured somewhere down the line, Kaarson would pay me back for the amount of effort that I put into this. However, as you can tell from the title of this video, this guy never had any intention of paying anyone back ever for anything, whether it was effort or a large sum of cash. We wanted to host about a dozen tournaments that ranged for about half a year. And there were some really good moments and there were some really bad moments. We had people cheat in the middle of the tournament. We had people send death threats because they weren't allowed in the tournament for previous actions. But through it all, we became really good friends, and at the same time, both of our names were starting to get recognized in the Crunker scene. Community members were reaching out to us, our regular stream views went up, and you could say that trust in who we were as content creators started to rise. Once we ran out of steam with the tournaments and we'd done everything we possibly could, I had a new venture and a new plan. I wanted to host major charity streams. These were charity streams that brought in thousands of viewers, and at one point, we were the #1 channel on Twitch Live with a peak of 21,000 views, thanks to working closely with Crunker and an embed that they allowed us to use, which meant the streams got played in the game itself, similar to what chess.com does. We hosted tons of these. I mean, I think we were at about 8 charity streams in total, and again, the same theme happened, right? I put in the effort, I organized it. I even got companies involved to give us prizes, and worked with Krunker and organized exclusive Twitch drops, which meant, you know, our faces got in the game and branded items got in the game too. And because of these charity streams, the first red flag on who Kaarson really was would appear. You see, in the year of 2021, I had a goal of 4 major charity streams, one every 3 months, with an overarching goal of hitting $100,000 raised for the year. Now, in the first 3 events, I was heavily supported by Krunker. That meant that they embedded us, gave us exclusive drops, and Krunker even chucked in thousands of donations to the charities of choice. However, by the 4th one, due to the fact that I had sort of moved away from Krunker and started streaming Grand Theft Auto roleplay, we didn't get as much support as we did before, which is completely fair and understandable. I wasn't a Krunker main anymore. I wasn't supporting the game day to day, so the game really didn't owe me anything. Because of that, viewership was expected to be a lot lower. We had no drops and no embed for it. However, I reached out to the exact same team that I had before. It was a team of 6 people, including myself and Kaarson, and everyone but Kaarson was on board. He seemed to be on board until he asked the question, would I get embeds and drops? And I told him no. And then all of a sudden, he became busy and unable to complete it. He started making excuses that he didn't raise enough the last time, despite the fact that he raised pretty much the exact same amount every single time we did these charity streams. And it really started to illuminate that maybe this was never about the charities for him. Maybe this was about how many viewers he could get or how much clout he could gain off a single event. After that charity stream ended and he wasn't a part of it, but majority of the Krunker community was, because we opened it up to basically everybody who wanted to stream for it, I started to drift apart from Kaarson a little bit. We weren't as close as we used to be, and I truly believe that was the beginning of the end. Now, this whole time, something had been lurking in the background that I wasn't aware of and really didn't pay too much attention to. It started on the 21st of December, 2019, when Kaarson approached me and said that he needed cash because his unemployment check hadn't come through. You see, he had decided to take a full year off from work, and he wanted to branch out into full-time content creation. Obviously, if you know anything about content creation, you should never do that unless you're already earning a substantial income, because the risk to award ratio is just way too skewed. It's just not worth it. And to me at the time, this was pretty understandable. This was a friend reaching out to me who was in a tight spot. He has kids, he has a wife. This guy just needed a little bit of help, and I was lucky enough to be in a position where I could afford to lend him that money. Of course, I had the full intention of receiving that money back, but Kaarson maybe had different ideas. I believe it was at this point itself that Kaarson realized just how easy it was to obtain said money, because I didn't put up a fight or ask for proof or anything. I just said, sure, here you go. Now, this 100 USD that I lent to Kaarson would end up taking weeks to recover. It had been nearly an entire month, and I was getting pretty annoyed by the fact that I had not received any money or any promise of the money coming back. On the 26th of January 2020, I decided to go a different route and become extremely blunt and a little bit rude in order to get my money back. The fact that it took so much following up and so much effort to get anything back from this guy started to raise a red flag with me. However, I kind of just pushed it down because I thought, hey, this is just a guy who's got a family. He's a little bit embarrassed about the fact that he's struggling, and, you know, it would suck to be in that position. It would be terrible to have to go around and ask friends that you don't even know that well for money in order to afford, you know, groceries or whatever it is for your family. It would turn out, though, that any reason Kaarson ever gave us for the money, in terms of it being for sick kids, it being for birthdays, it being for anything, was 99% a lie. Now, unfortunately, being the sucker I was, however, unbeknownst to me, there was a lot of other people getting suckered into this as well. I would go on to lend Kaarson money a total of 4 separate times. These dates being the 24th of the 2nd, 2021, 15th of the 3rd, 2022, and the final time being the 12th of June, 2022. This meant that by the end of it, I had lent Kaarson over 600 USD. Now, for some people, that may not seem like much to lend over a couple of years, but every friend I've ever had in my entire life, I have never lent more than $10 to, and I've got friends that I've known for over a decade now. This isn't a normal thing that friends do, constantly requesting money from each other and constantly being in debt to one another. If you do have a friendship like this, I would urge you to maybe relook at it, because it's just not a normal thing. Now, this last time in June of 2022 would actually be the catalyst for Kaarson's downfall. This would be the final card that toppled his little tower of cards that he had built upon lies, deception, and manipulation that would eventually lead to him stealing 55,000 USD, or roughly 82,000 Australian dollars. Now, the reason he needed to borrow this money this last time was because his car had broken down. He said his car was basically destroyed after an mechanical incident, and he needed to buy a new car. He has kids that need to go to school. He has a wife that needs to go to work. They needed a car to get around, which is understandable to me. Over here in Australia, we have something called comprehensive insurance, where basically if your car gets destroyed, the insurance company will pay you out the value of that car. If he had something like that in place, he would have been able to purchase a car of equal value potentially, but it seemed like that was something he didn't have or just couldn't afford. Now, in most cases, if you didn't have that insurance and you suddenly needed money to buy a new car, you would buy the cheapest working car that you could find. You wouldn't go out and buy something that's like 2 to 3 years old. You wouldn't get something that's new, and you certainly wouldn't get an upgrade to the car you already have, because if you could afford an upgrade, you probably would have bought it already. But not Kaarson. He decided that he needed to get a major upgrade to the car he had. In fact, he got a car so new, it makes my Mazda 3 from 2012 look like a heaping pile of shit. I didn't know this at the time because I wasn't friends with him on Facebook, but he would go on to actually brag about this new car purchase, stating that he had been able to obtain the finance for it due to his Twitch income. He would even put in a cheeky little bit of banter saying, follow your dreams or something, which in hindsight, looking back now, is a bit of a slap in the face, because it wasn't his money that he managed to get that finance from. It was actually people paying for the finance under false assumptions. People giving him money because his kids were sick, or people giving him money because his washing machine broke. These are actually the people who paid off the finance for this car. It was never him. But this begs the question, where was that money going? If he was scamming so much money out of people and he could somehow afford to get finance, where was the actual money that would have gone to the finance going? Circling back to the money I lent him in order to pay for bills and stuff, just after he bought that car, I decided to follow up again. Now, at this point, I had sort of realized I've lent this guy money a few times, and pretty much every time he's been pretty poor getting it back to me. So I'm getting a little bit tired and I want my money back, as any normal person would feel. And so I followed up where my money was on the 19th of June and didn't get a proper response until the 22nd of June with a pretty generic and bland excuse. Now, this did raise some questions for me because it just seemed like an excuse that had no backing. It didn't seem real. It sounded like something I would have told my teacher back in high school if I didn't hand in the homework on time. But I didn't press any further. I waited, and until the 24th of June, I was pretty silent. On the 24th of June, I follow up again to see where my money is, and this time I get an excuse that's even fishier than the last one. This was a relationship I would have broken up with Kaarson already, because this sounded awful. These were red flags popping up left, right, and center, and I even remember telling my partner, my girlfriend, that something's not right here. Something feels really off, and I'm pretty sure I'm getting scammed. However, he decided to put down another timeline that he just wouldn't end up meeting. He told me I'd get the cash in 24 hours, and then 24 hours came and passed. I had to follow up again, and this time I got another excuse and another time frame being given. At this point, I knew I was getting played, and I knew something fishy was up. It just didn't seem right to me that one person could have this much issue paying someone back. I didn't know it at the time, but realistically, what he was trying to do was find someone else to give him the money so that he could send it to me to get me off his back. And on the 27th of June, I followed up for the last time. He gave me another excuse, this time PayPal, saying that there's suspicious behavior or something in his account, and that's when it really cinched it for me. I knew that Kaarson was lying to my face, I knew that he didn't have the money, and I knew that there was something bigger and deeper going on. And this is when I found the beginning of the rabbit hole, and what would eventually lead to a sum of $55,000 missing. I didn't realize. I looked back through our messages, and you know, it seems as though I've lent you about 600 plus USD over the last 2 years, and you know, I get it. Fucking life gets tough sometimes, and it seems like you've had some really, you know, tough moments here and there as well. But you know, we've also been friends for 3 years, and I just feel like this isn't the way friends do it. You know what I mean? When it comes to borrowing money, you know, it shouldn't be on the person who lent you the money to follow you up constantly and try and get answers. And it's something that you should be completely proactive on, and sending me messages saying, hey, look, fuck, sorry, man, I missed the deadline, you know? Because at the beginning, dude, if you hadn't given me a timeline, I would have just been like, yeah, whenever, I don't give a shit. But you gave me a timeline, and then you gave me another timeline, and another timeline, and at some point, you're like, fuck, that's 3 timelines missed, you know? Like, surely no one on earth is fucking this unlucky.
No,
And
you're
it
right.
starts showing a pattern there, man. And that pattern made me start thinking a little bit. And I started reaching out to other people. And after talking to, uh, we've sort of correlated a few details here and there, and it turns out you owe $1,800 between the four of us, with some of us not having been paid back for months. And to take that a step further, after looking at some of those transactions and the timelines and the messages between them, I found a multiple of occasions where you have asked for money from someone and within 24 hours have shown evidence of spending that money on not something that you asked for the money for. And after learning that, I'm wondering, well, what the fuck's going on, sir? That's what I'm asking you, Carson. What the fuck is going on?
I mean, it's just tough. There's no ulterior things like that. It's just hard as fuck. I'm
But you
struggling
owe
to catch
people
up.
money and then you're borrowing more money from other people. And in some instances, you're literally borrowing money from other people to pay the first person back. Like, that's a Ponzi scheme. And this is where things get really juicy. This is where I discovered everything and found out that the tip of the iceberg was just the beginning. At 10:30 p.m. on June 27th, 2022, I came up with the idea that would uncover $55,000 of stolen funds. You see, me and Kaarson had a very similar friend group. In fact, we were part of the same tight-knit friend group of content creators. It dawned on me that if he had felt okay asking me for sums of money here and there, there's a good chance he probably felt okay asking them at some point. Now, I figured maybe he borrowed $10 or $20 or $100 in total from these people, and he was struggling to pay them back as well. My idea was we find that out, we confront him, and we tell him, look, it's fine, just stop lying to us and stop giving us bogus timeframes. If you're struggling financially, that's cool, we can wait. But just don't lie to us because we're your friends. That's not what I would find though. I just point blank asked them, hey, have you lent money to Kaarson? And if so, has he paid it all back to you? From the 4 people that I asked, 3 of them had lent money to Kaarson and 3 of them had not received their money back. The amounts would range from $250 all the way up to $1,000 plus, which was shocking for me. I mean, I could never imagine having an outstanding debt with someone that large. $1,000 plus, which was probably made up of small increments over time, is insane. Within 6 hours of starting my investigation at 4 a.m. on the 28th of June, I now had a starting idea of what was unfolding. Kaarson was scamming his friends. We all jumped into a call and started deep diving into the amounts and the dates because things just weren't adding up. Excuses that we were being given were matching up with excuses that were given months later. Sometimes we both got a message at the same time and he took both amounts from us. We needed to figure out what was going on and realistically where this money was. At one point, we found what I would call the tipping point in taking this from just a simple scam to a Ponzi scheme. Essentially. You see, what Kaarson was doing was he was borrowing money from one person to pay another person back. This is called a Ponzi scheme. Now, typically a Ponzi scheme is you create a company and you get a first round of investors. They put money into your company, and then you go and get a second round of investors who invest even more than the first round. You pay back the first round of investors, they get their money back, and then you go to a third round of investors to pay your second round of investors back, till eventually either you go to jail or you run off with the money and disappear. The idea being for the investors that they get a bit of money back from what they put in. Now, Kaarson was running a Ponzi scheme, except there was no return on investment. He was just banking on the kindness of his friendships. And if you're not aware, a Ponzi scheme is a highly illegal thing to do. So Kaarson had created a Ponzi scheme, scamming his friends to live a life that he couldn't afford, while simultaneously taking money that he could never afford to pay back. I would go on to find that he would take this money and use it to afford alcohol, drugs, and a secret secondary life that none of us ever knew he had. Now, these have come from unverified sources, but if they are true, then they start to paint a bit of a picture as to who Kaarson truly was. Multiple Twitter accounts, which were later proven to not be bots or not be fake spam accounts, were accusing Kaarson of living a double life, where he would find women to have relationships and essentially scam them by taking money from them as well. Now, I have made attempts to reach out to these women who, expressed their issues with him on Twitter. However, they have either declined to reply or have deleted their accounts currently. So, you've got a man asking his internet friends and IRL women for money. He's stating it's for dire reasons like my family's in trouble, or, my car's broken, or, my washing machine is on the fritz. And he gets that money. He gets it because it's a good reason. You know, family's in trouble. You'd want to give money for that. However, in this instance, you can see that the very next day, he suddenly has $15 to spend on an application to join a GTA roleplay server. You see, at the time, he was very jealous that myself and another friend of ours, GP, had joined this, you know, prestigious, let's call it, roleplay server online. I told him how good it was. I told him how good we were doing and how much we had grown since we had left Crunker, and he wanted to join as well. Now, in order to apply for the server, you got to pay a $15 fee to get your application seen, essentially. He had no issues coming with that 15 USD, but the day prior was begging for money. Does that seem like somebody who's financially struggling, or does that seem like somebody who's scamming and maybe financially illiterate? And if that wasn't enough, here's an example of Kaarson using other people's money to pay back his previous debts. You can see here Kaarson asked for $200 on March 11th, but just 7 days later is able to send back 100 USD that he had owing to me, which I'd been chasing since February 27th. Beyond that, I have multiple instances of where Kaarson was essentially using money from a new person to pay off an old person. I can't reveal a lot of them because they do have a lot of sensitive information, but as it currently stands, I have 6 separate instances where Kaarson took money from one to pay off someone else. Now let's circle back to the fact that at this time, I'm still trying to chase this guy up for money, which he hasn't given to me yet. Because of that, I've followed up with friends and uncovered basically a major scamming scheme going on in our tiny little community. Well, on the 30th of June at 6:49 a.m. after a sleepless night, I decided to call Kaarson for the very last time. I told Kaarson that I needed to speak to him, and you could tell immediately that he was nervous. He kept asking me what it's about. He kept apologizing profusely and telling me how hard he was going to try to get me that money back, and how sorry he was. He kept running into issue after issue. Well, I didn't budge. I was relentless, and I told him, it's easier if we just jump on a call. Let's get a call going. During call, I produced receipt after receipt after receipt, essentially exposing his web of lies and how far back his deceit went. I showed him that we had timeframes that lined up with people getting multiple payments and people getting payments back, which essentially proved that he was using people's money to pay other people back. I showed him instances where some of this borrowed money was used on holidays, and of course I showed him the instance where he was bragging about his new car, but he had just recently received money from quite a few people. There was even an instance of him begging for money because it was his kid's birthday the next day and he wanted to buy him the new Pokemon game. However, the very next day, he goes on to stream that new Pokemon game on stream. Not exactly an action you would do if it's your kid's brand new game for their birthday that you could barely afford yourself. So I just straight up asked him. I was tired, I was cranky, and I was pretty upset. I was pretty blunt, and I just said, how can you do this? How can you scam people that you call your friends? And his response was, I don't view it as scamming. I don't know how you could not view it as scamming, but his only response back was, I don't view it as scamming.
It's wrong. It's totally 100% wrong.
That's all you've got to say after you've just been confronted with the fucking knowledge that we know you've been scamming people that you're meant to be calling your friends.
Well, it's not scamming. Like,
It's not scamming. Kaarson, you're saying, oh, can I borrow this money? And then effectively keeping it. It's been 6 months since you paid back. You owe $464. You owe $250, and you owe me $120. I mean, for mine, sure, maybe that one's not scamming because you're still giving me these bogus fucking time frames, but you haven't paid some of these people back for months. Now, this just further angered me, if I'm being completely honest. I was pissed off. I hadn't slept for the whole night, and this guy was just straight up not giving me the answers that I wanted. So I point blank asked him, how many people do you actually owe money to? And his response was, I owe 4 people money plus my mom. Now, I pushed pretty hard on this and I said, that's not right because I know that there's additional people, which he kind of rebutted, and at the time it made sense. However, as I know these days, there are 13 individuals he currently owes money to, plus his mom. There could be God knows how many more people. I mean, realistically, Kaarson, tell me the truth. How many people do you owe money to?
No, it's just you 4 and my mom.
Dude, you're lying to me right now because I know that there are 2 people who are also involved. I've already got confirmation of them. I just don't know their names and the amounts, but I've got confirmation from one of the other boys that they've spoken to them. The lying's got to stop, dude. I knew at the time that I had caught him in a lie, but he didn't, and I didn't have enough supporting evidence to show that there were additional people out there that he owed money to. At this point, it was still a closed conversation within just a small group of friends. But eventually, this would open up to the entire community becoming involved in this. At the end of the call, I straight up asked him, is there anything else you have to say about this? His only response that he truly seemed to care about throughout this entire call was him begging me not to make a video on this. He started using his children as an excuse, saying they would affect their lives somehow, and he just couldn't handle that and didn't want them to have to go through it because of his mistake. At the time, I sort of sympathized with him and I kind of thought, yeah, maybe that's the case. Fast forward to today, nearly 6 to 7 months later, I realized that his children were a common tactic for him to hide behind. If he couldn't get money because, his washing machine was broke, the next person he would tell, his children would suddenly be deathly ill or injured in some way. But looking back, I realized that he was actually just more concerned about his channel and his views than the fact that he was just found out scamming his friends. And he would go on to prove this by streaming as if nothing was wrong for 2 to 3 months afterwards. Now, I want to make it painfully clear that at the time I had no reason to make the video, and in fact I didn't want to make a video. However, due to the fact that he has suddenly ghosted everyone and cannot be found on the face of this earth, I figured it was about time to let everyone know who he truly was and make this video to see if there's other victims out there. After a couple months, Kaarson essentially quit streaming and told us that he was focusing on a second job in order to pay everyone back. He even went as far as to sell some of his streaming equipment to settle his debt with me and to pay back a portion to other people. He would try and use this though to garner some sympathy and make us feel bad for the fact that his streaming was now at an end because he owed people money. Like it was somehow the victim's fault that he never paid them back. This is who Kaarson truly was, a manipulative, deceitful person who would use any means necessary to protect whatever goal he had in mind, which at the time, from the beginning towards the end, had always been to be a famous Twitch streamer. He had begun paying the 4 known victims back about $50 a fortnight. Not a massive sum, but enough to get things going and enough to keep people happy for a bit. However, this amount eventually dropped to $20 a fortnight and then dropped further to $10 a fortnight. And pretty soon, repayment dates were being missed exactly like when I was chasing up for my money in June of 2022. Now, he started using the exact same excuses that he used to obtain the money to prove that he couldn't pay the money back. Stuff like the money is going to paying towards my appliances, which was broken, which is fake. Oh, it's going to paying my mortgage off, which was fake. The exact same stuff he used to garner all this sympathy to get him the money was now his shield to avoid having to pay that money back. It was at this point a brand new person entered the mix due to a mutual friend that I had. In order to protect their identity, I'm going to call them Khalil. Now, Khalil had also been scammed to the sum of $970 USD. And luckily, Khalil worked with people in real life who incurred debt and helped them get out of those debt holes. Turns out this was just a really happy coincidence for Kaarson, and hopefully would allow him to move forward by paying us all back in a much more structured and responsible way. Khalil gave Kaarson multiple plans to tackle this debt, from approaching local credit unions to consolidate his debt, to repayment plans, to even helping him source new jobs in his local area to bring in more money. Every single time Khalil offered one of these advices or options, Kaarson shut it down. He didn't want to do it, or he'd say, yeah, maybe, and never actually approach it. Kaarson was not interested ever from day one to the last day in paying anyone back. Now, at this point, Kaarson decided his streaming or YouTube career may be in the dirt. He deleted every video that he had, he deleted his Twitter account, and he started deleting people on Discord. He had unfriended all of us, and it became nearly impossible for us to reach out to him, except for Khalil. Because Khalil was cordial and friendly, because he genuinely just wanted to help Kaarson get out of this debt hole and help the people that had been affected, Khalil was able to remain friends with Kaarson on Discord and have a one-on-one chat with him. Khalil ended up becoming our messenger and the only way we could really get to Kaarson. And while Khalil was acting as our manager, another idea dawned on myself and the original 4 victims. If Khalil, someone we didn't know and had never interacted with before, was scammed by Kaarson, does that mean there were more people? And it wasn't just his close friends? Were there people out there that we had never heard of, maybe from other communities that he used to belong to, who were also owed money by Kaarson? It was at that exact same time that we all did another deep dive into our PayPals and went back to 2019 and realized that the actual debt he had incurred to our small group was close to $5,000. So we set about asking mutual friends or friends of friends, or even just randoms in the communities that we knew he may have passed by once upon a time. This meant that we had to expand our search beyond Krunker, and we went back to his old communities like World of Warcraft or even card games. After a couple of days of searching and questioning and getting people to assist us in asking, we found an additional 5 people. Now, these additional 5 took the total sum stolen to $13,000, which at the time felt groundbreaking. We couldn't believe it had gotten that high. It was now 5 digits that were stolen. It was insane. I had never seen something like it, especially for someone who wasn't a big streamer or a big YouTuber, someone who, in my mind, didn't actually have that much pull or influence over anyone. The fact that this one guy who had made so many terrible decisions in his life, like quitting his full-time job to pursue full-time content creation with a viewership of 30 viewers, was able to con this many people out of so much money blew my mind. We discovered that some of these debts that were owed went all the way back to 2019, which meant that he had been running the same scam undetected for 3 years. Now, it was during, I guess you could call it a bonding session, where we were all commiserating in our new little group of scammies when we found a few new people. You see, the new people that we brought in realized that because we were there and they were there, and they didn't really know us, there must be more people as well. The exact same thought process we had when we found them. So they started asking people as well, and word got around, and we found some more victims on top of that. So in a matter of a few days, we had gone from about $5,000 owed to $13,000. However, in a matter of a few hours, that number skyrocketed. You see, with these two new victims that we found, the total amount stolen by Kaarson went from 13,000 USD to 55,000 USD. That's right, 55,000, more than half $100,000 was stolen and scammed by Kaarson. Now, just for reference and to use some statistics to put that large number into perspective, in 2019, the United States Census Bureau stated that the median income in the US was $31,133. This meant that Kaarson had scammed more than an entire year's salary out of people he met online, and apparently women that he had scammed IRL to. Now, we actually don't know what the dollar figures are for the women that he scammed IRL, but I imagine that they would be somewhat similar because it turns out that what I got scammed of was actually on the lower end. A lot of people had lost over $1,000 to Kaarson. So it turned out that the average amount scammed was about $1,500 when it came to Kaarson, which is insane. If you think about it, that is an insane amount of money to be able to scam out of multiple people. Now, I want to point out that that amount does not include a certain select few who had lent Kaarson tens of thousands of dollars. Now, those tens of thousands of dollars were lent to Kaarson due to some pretty horrific excuses he used. Stuff like his kid was going to be terminally ill if he didn't receive that money, or his kid would have a lifelong health condition if that money wasn't in his bank account. We've all used excuses when it comes to maybe working a full-time or part-time job where we say something like, you know, oh, my mom's sick or my brother's sick or something. But it's another thing to defraud someone of tens of thousands of dollars on the basis that your child may never be the same again, especially when it's just not true. Now, these insane amounts changed everything for us. We went from thinking, oh, it's just a little bit of money that's gone, you know, individually, to this may be a felony. This may be enough to land this guy in jail. Now, any amounts over $2,000 that were borrowed that had obvious repayment terms, regardless of a contract or signatures being made, could classify as a felony. This means that there is a real possibility that we can take Kaarson to court and get charges laid out. Now, some of these charges range from years in jail to multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines, and we are actually investigating the legal route to make this happen. In the interim, we found out that PayPal also has a 180-day cashback policy, which has been able to recover about 600 USD, which is a small sum considered to the large sum that he's stolen, but a little bit is something. Eventually, Khalil, our messenger, was ghosted by Kaarson too. He was deleted off everything. Discord, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even Steam. Kaarson went so far as to delete him off Steam. That's how much he wanted to run away from his problems. The thing is with Kaarson, he was never a very smart man. You see, in order to complete some of these scams, in order to give them some legitimacy when they had none, he would give out extremely personal information, which led to a few of us having him as a friend on Facebook, which he seemed to have forgotten about. Now, his attempt at ghosting the last person who was in contact with him pissed a lot of us off. We really wanted to keep this going and get everyone's money back, because the goal has always been to get that money back, not to humiliate him or put him down or anything like that. When he's tried to run away from 55,000 USD, you're going to feel a type of way about him. We hit up every avenue that we thought we still had left. We had his email address, which we hit up, we had his Facebook account that we hit up, and one of us had his IRL phone number, which he texted. Now, this text wasn't a nice text. It was essentially, you're going to pay me back this money or I'm taking you to court, to which he responded with a one-word answer, understood. Now, the funny thing about Kaarson was he never really thought of the future. In the moments where he scammed people, all he cared about was getting that money into his account, which meant he made a lot of mistakes along the way. One such mistake was the fact that he had actually had this person in his house at one point for a stream. Now, that meant that this person could easily get call papers served directly to his front door, and I think Kaarson knew that because he was the only one out of a dozen attempts who he responded to. This would end up being the last contact that anyone has received from Kaarson for nearly 2 months now. From the victims like myself who lost a few $100s to the victims who lost tens of thousands of dollars, as it currently stands today, without legal interference or getting Kaarson into a courtroom, that money may be gone forever. Kaarson was an average guy who streamed a small game to a tight-knit community. He always seemed respectful, supportive, and a genuinely happy guy to be around. However, under all of that was a man who made terrible choices and was constantly drowning in the debt that he created himself. A man who was happy to use his friends as living piggy banks without any regard to their own personal situations. He made excuses, he used his family to manipulate people, and he downright deceived people on the basis of friendship. He was able to amass a $55,000 fortune through these methods. I want to take this time to apologize to the Crunker community. I was the one who initially introduced Kaarson to the community, and I feel somewhat responsible for bringing him into a lot of your lives. At the time, I believed he was an incredibly good person who had nothing but good morals and good ideas ahead of him. He was respectful, he was kind, and he was supportive to me all throughout the beginning of our friendship. And even during our early days in Crunker, he still felt the exact same way. If I had any idea that he was bringing these debts or this personality or this underlying persona, I would have never invited him into what was such a tight-knit and close community that cared about one another. I also apologize for essentially being the person who gave him a platform and being the one who initially campaigned for him. I look back now on the charity streams, for instance, where I had a few people tell me, I don't like him, I don't vibe with him, and I wish I had listened to them. At the time, I had no evidence to prove he was a bad guy, but hindsight's 2020. It pains me to think that all the good in the world that we did was done right next to somebody who has done so much bad. Now, to anyone out there who is an unknown victim of Kaarson still, I want you to know that there is help. I've set up a private Discord channel, link in the description, for you to reach out to me. If you can reach out with verifiable claims that he has stolen your money, I will do everything in my power to direct you into the right channels in order to legally get your money back. And finally, I'd like to say this. There is a message behind all of this. When it comes to lending money, whether it be to friends or family, there is one mentality that you should always have. Never lend more money than you're willing to lose. This will protect your friendships and your family relations. Myself and currently 12 others are victims of not having that mentality, and if I could turn back the clock, I would do everything in my power to stop them from ever giving this man a dime. Unfortunately, by the end of this, I lost a really good friend. Someone I considered an equal, someone that I thought I was going to go to the tippity top of Twitch with, and we're going to be lifelong friends. But the only thing that got me through this was the new and close friendships I made with the fellow victims. So even after having to deal with such a terrible, shitty person, at least there was some good towards the end of it. Thanks for watching.